So basically, this British spy converts to Islam and
Yeah.
just basically takes over Saudi Arabia. That is so crazy to me.
Well, they set it up. They're basically like, look, you guys are all warring tribes. Let's put you into, these kingdoms, and you'll be colonies, I guess, of the British Empire. So this is where you get Iraq. This is where you get Saudi Arabia, right? Like, so prior to the British Empire, there wasn't Iraq and Saudi Arabia. There were just tribes warring, basically.
Yeah, and so I've done episodes. I can't find the book. It's this book I bought a long time ago that basically broke down that like fits in exactly what you're talking about how like the Saudis, or the House of Saud or whatever, the Saudi royals, they were nomads. Just wandering the land, and they found oil under their ground, so they set up this kind of system with them. And it was like, listen, we'll set up the whole way to extract your oil. You just have to agree to a couple things. First of all, is like a 60-year fixed deposit into our banks, and you have to invest your money in America, and all that was done. And then they used all that Saudi money to basically give it to third world countries in loans that they could never ever pay off. And when they faulted on the loans, they basically screwed the Saudis. And to this day, I think that's why you have to go to Islam. I mean, the whole thing about Islam is go dance around a black cube, which to me is absolutely insanity. And it's why Saudi Arabia plays ball with Israel so much, because everything you're saying just totally fits into this, that they are controlled by the British Empire, or what has morphed into basically the City of London and the banking cabal. And it totally fits in. It's like all this, and that's why he's totally playing ball, because they're captured. And when you look at like America pumping, we produce more oil than Saudi Arabia. Why do we need Saudi oil?
We don't actually need that. Kissinger set it up so that we would be reliant on them. Exactly.
Yeah.
When's that? And you guys said it was a contract. When is it over? Is it over? Did they re-sign or?
That's a great question. I don't know when it defaulted, but I guarantee they just kept rolling it over. Like, hey, dude, this is working for everybody. Let's keep it going. The Saudis get to have more money than anyone ever. They have America and Israel basically sending them arms to control their nation. And, everyone uses their oil because they want to control that region. So it just totally,
and they had already figured out, like, back in like 1917, wait a minute, there's probably oil right in these places. That's part of the reason why some of these spies are going there, right? So Britain's not just interested in like controlling the land. Obviously they are, and dividing it up and running it in an empire. But there's a book that I just bought. I haven't read it yet, but it's going to line up, I think, with a lot of the research I've been doing. That it's called Black Gold Spies, which is that probably T.E. Lawrence and St. John Philby are also there as really like oil scouts. I mean, spies are not just spying for the government to run assassinations or black ops or whatever. They're spying out for resources to take. And so it makes perfect sense. I'll just read, this is just public information. And Wikipedia says in 1917, St. John Philby was sent to the interior of the Arabian Peninsula as the head of a mission to Ibn Saud, the chieftain who professed Wahhabism. Keep that in mind. The movement within Sunni Islam, the bitter enemy of Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca, who led the Hashemites in the Arab Revolt. Now, they were both contending to be king of the Arabs at this time. And the reason for that, the British wanted this to occur with Ibn Saud because they were going to set up the Saudis, who would then run and control Mecca. If the British Empire could control Mecca, that'd be huge. That's what they were after, as well as, wait a minute, there's probably oil in these places too. So they're black gold spies, as well as being religious operators or religious engineers, religious spies. So this is key. Why? Because this is where you get Wahhabism, which is this movement to revive what we call Atharism or Salafi Islam. And so a lot of the people that I end up debating, they're part of what's called Salafi radical Islam. This is like Jake, Daniel Hakikachu, Muhammad Hijab, those guys that you see me debating. They're part of that school of radical Salafi Islam, which believes in like the straight up hardcore Islamic doctrines. But what I'm getting at is that the modern resurgence of that is intimately tied up with British intelligence, the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is why a lot of people have connected a lot of the recent terror events of the last several decades to these types of groups, right? Muslim Brotherhood, and that doesn't exclude the CIA, right? So like when it comes out that not the big 9 event, the 9/11 event is connected to Saudis, that's because Saudi intelligence goes back to being basically set up by British intelligence.
So crazy.
And by the way, yes, you're right that there's a close relationship between those and Israeli intelligence too.
So is your belief that because I always had this debate, do you think there's moderate, and I have Muslim friends, do you think there's moderate Islam?
I mean, there are people who interpret Islam in a moderate way, but when you actually get to the text of the Quran and the traditional teachings of the Sunnis and the Shias, like they do believe that they're supposed to engage in all forms of jihad. So jihad is not just warring against false ideas. There is also actual jihad. So I think that's traditional Islam. So anytime you see Muslims who are progressive or something like that, keep in mind within the Quran, they actually have a basis for what they call a kind of legitimate deception. So they believe that when they're in the minority, it's legitimate for them to deceive. So they can actually pretend to be your friend. But traditional Orthodox Islam, either way, Sunni, Shia, like they actually believe that they're not supposed to be your friends. They're only supposed to be your friend when they're in the minority, and then when they're in the majority, they can sort of levy the jizya and put in Sharia law and all this kind of stuff. So I would say progressive Islam is really a manifestation in certain Western countries or maybe in places like Syria. So not every Muslim is committed to traditional Islam, but traditional Islam does teach these types of things for sure.
Can I ask you something? And this isn't me trying to be, but it's a legitimate question. Can we say that, as we get into that, this British spy, this British Empire's influence on Islam, when we get into something called the Babylonian oral history of the rabbis in the Talmud, do you have any thoughts of that we could be seeing the same playbook done by the same people at a very high level, whether it's the Babylonians, the Phoenicians, or whoever they are going back far enough? When we see the things in the Talmud and people have a discussion about that, do you see any similarities in that?
Probably similarities in terms of modes and methods of control and manipulation. For example, Muhammad seems to have thought that he was legitimately going to be like a new manifestation of a Jewish and Christian prophet or figure like that. So what he did was he seems to have combined elements of the Old Testament Bible, the New Testament teachings of Christ and the apostles to a minor degree, and rabbinic and Talmudic teachings. So there's actually multiple places within the Quran that are derived from the Talmud earlier to Muhammad. And so Muhammad seems to have thought, assuming that he wasn't some sort of creation or a manipulated figure, he seems to have thought that he was legitimately like combining together this new, true, purified religion. I mean, I think he was crazy, but if that thesis is not correct, then he was perhaps like maybe a circle of like warlords who saw a way to pick and choose from these religions to create a situation where a very crafty, cunning caliph or leader can utilize Islam in whatever way that he needs. Does that make sense? Like you have medieval caliphs who can say stuff like, Christians are the people of the book, Jews are the people of the book with us, we need to be at peace with them. But then when they also need to flip the script, they can say, well, the book, the Prophet Muhammad tells us that when the time is necessary, we can just attack and kill the Jews and the Christians. You see what it's very useful as a opportunist machine when you need it. That's what I'm trying to say. So could there be like a secret elite in the background. What's interesting is that Shia Islam, which is very different from like the other branches in terms of the structure. So Shia Islam is what's in Iran. Like Shia is very mystical. They have this idea of like a succession of leaders that are kind of like popes to them, like a papal version of Islam. And they also believe in like these hidden imams. So I would say in Shia Islam, there is the possibility of like a secret, mystical, Gnostic inner core group, because they actually kind of believe that. I don't know if they actually have that, but I think that that's possible within Shia Islam.
It is so crazy to me that, the implications of like the British Empire basically just completely making up something to control a region. What was before Islam was introduced, do you know what the religion of that area was?
It was pagan, just straight up polytheism. And this is like this is admitted that like, now there were some Christians and Jews in Medina at the time, but the predominant religion at Mecca was like this place where they basically would have all the gods. So everybody would come and do like a religious pilgrimage there. They're all pagans, but it's a city where there are also Jews and Christians that lived in the city. They didn't care about Mecca, but the Arab pagans would come to Mecca for whatever reason and just sort of like do their deity's homage in whatever way. It was also kind of a big, economic center too, because it's a place for people to go and trade and so forth. So it wasn't just religious, but I think it just became a fertile grounds for the evolution of this religion, whatever the real reason for it was. In other words, that's what the stone is. It's like, that's all. It was formerly just a pagan thing. Muhammad says, by the way, now it's pure monotheism. But I mean, it's the same sort of practices of, doing the march around this rock or whatever. It's obviously pagan, is what I'm trying to say. But now it's just, no, it's not pagan. It's Islam. You see what I'm saying? It's like, but the same types of practices like icons or something like that, Muslims will say, well, if you're a Christian and you have an icon of Jesus, that's pagan. It's like, well, dude, you're marching around and kissing a rock. What are you talking about? Seriously. Like, it's a double standard, if that makes sense.
It's just so interesting. And if we just study the playbook of this super like elite, like apex predator group, it's just like, they just love to create these mindsets that just clash with each other constantly fighting with each other so that no one can ever come together and agree like, hey dude, we're not each other's enemies. But if you constantly get everything into a religious war, you'll never have peace ever. It's so crazy to me listening to you tell me about how they just went in there and just created this religion and just basically manipulated these people.
Well,
it's so crazy.
So Islam already exists as this very militant type of Arab religion, desert.
Before Muhammad?
No. I'm saying before British Empire, obviously, right? So what the British did was very effectively at the turn of the century, they developed this new domain called the Orientalists. And this is basically a bunch of academics who were also spies who went and basically mastered these cultures, these Orientalist academics at Oxford, Cambridge, right? These elite British institutions. And this is where you kind of get the modern version of ethnography and spycraft. So today's, CIA people studying cultures, it's really developing out of this British imperial model of, St. John Philby goes and studies and basically immerses himself in, Arab culture, becomes essentially a sheikh. And then he's like the expert to the British establishment on all things Saudi, right? Same thing with
he established the House of Saud. Is that basically what we're saying?
Well, to be the kings of that area for the British Empire. Because it was supposed to be there was a war between the Hashemites, who are the rulers of Jordan to this day, right? So if you go to the Kingdom of Jordan, they're the Hashemites, which is another faction of Muslims. They were fighting with the Sauds to be, quote, king of the Arabs. And so the CIA, interestingly, right after this period when the British Empire wanes, when the CIA takes over, originally they thought they wanted to have the same model of what was called pan-Arabism. And they thought if we could have Arab nationalism and we could establish kind of like a modern, industrialized, updated version of Islam for the Middle East, these people could advance and they could have, universities and swimming pools and like whatever, is technology, jobs, corporations, whatever. But then you got this other group within Western intelligence, British or U.S. intelligence said, no, we don't want that. We're going to go with the older British model of supporting radical Islam. And that's why the CIA started supporting, like British intelligence had for a while, Wahhabism. You see what? So in other words, they experimented with both trying to update and have like a progressive Islam for the Middle East. That's where you get places like, you've seen those pictures, I'm sure, where like Iran has at one point universities and women walking around without burqas. And you see pictures of Syria when the Baathists came to power and they set up basically universities. They modernized. But then the radical Muslims opposed all of that at the behest of other members of the CIA and people who wanted to say, no, let's just go with the radical Muslim approach because that's much better as a weapon, right, to hold back and to destroy and to do whatever they want to do.
Bro, that's the most real shit I've ever heard, dude. That is the most real shit I've ever. That explains everything that's going on everywhere.
Well, and
this might be the same thing. Would you say that they influenced the Shia and the Shui in any kind of way?
Well, in what sense,
actually? So like what I'm talking about is like the Salafi or the Wahhabi. That's radical Islam that's Sunni. So within Sunni Islam, you have like these really strict schools. Think about it like schools within a bigger, broader thing. So everything that's not Iran and Shia is typically Sunni, and then what's Sunni is like the mainline biggest numbers of Islam. It's like 90% or something. And within that, you have these schools that range from kind of like more liberal interpretations of the Quran and the Hadith, all the way over to like the most extreme ISIS type stuff. So what I'm trying to say is that the West, a large part of Western intelligence, probably also Israeli and British intelligence, they said at a certain point around the 1960s and 70s, we need to shift over to aligning ourselves more with the super radical Muslims and Muslim Brotherhood, which British intelligence was already using, Muslim Brotherhood, radical Muslims, because that would be a better way to wreck shit, keep this stuff like from not advancing.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what's happening in the United States right now. They went one way, they kind of built it up to see how it goes, and now I think they're just trying, like you're saying, I've said this forever. The woke left is the ISIS of the United States. They're just well-funded radicals set to destabilize.
Well, the same people that have imported and want more and more Islamic presence in the UK and in America are the same people pushing the woke left, and the left and Islam align for cross purposes. That actually goes again back to British intelligence in the 1920s and 30s. The Fabian socialists in the UK said, let's bring in Muslims into the UK, but we got to start not with the radicals, not with the sort of Wahhabi, Athari Sunnis. Let's start with Sufis because they're mystical and they're cool and they're sort of new agey. So they brought into the universities. There's a whole chapter on this, which is great in the Milner Fabian conspiracy book. They brought into the British universities all these Sufis, and that prepared a lot of the UK for accepting Islam. Now, fast forward to today, you've got Islamic mayors. You've got it's called Londonistan. I've been to the UK, and it's like Muslim everywhere, right?
Johnny, you were just there, right?
Yeah, just a few months ago. I mean, I said this back then. It's like what it's a dystopian future of the United States,
exactly.
Both London and Paris. If we follow the path that we're on now,
exactly,
for the most part, that's where
the same people who made those decisions and ran that crap for the UK are the same people that now run our country and are making the same decisions for our country.
To what end, though? I mean, because they live here. They're going to suffer the consequences of these decisions.
I don't
Well,
think
they don't believe Islam. Islam's just a tool.
I know. That's why I'm. To what end? I mean, because I think. I mean, it seems obvious that society will crumble with that kind of division. You know,
If you're a Fabian socialist or one of these sort of elite technocrat minded people, you have no problem with society crumbling. That's part of that. You need it to crumble to bring in the new order. So yeah, I think.
So the idea is to replace it with technocracy. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, Islam is like a broom that's used to like sweep up and destroy. Even though they don't believe Islam, and
more like a vacuum cleaner, and then I think sucked up too.
But and you can even find elite, whether they're far left elite technocrats, atheists, and even like you can find rabbis who will say, "We don't care if like Muslims go and destroy." I mean, they're doing that work for us. So.
You're so right, bro. You're so right, and they just keep using the same game plan over and over and over again. Even if you take a look at like what the U.S. government, what the Canadian government did to the indigenous, they just keep using that game plan over and over again. They did it to black people in the inner city, and now they're doing it to basically big cities. They're flooding it with drugs. They're empowering females into jobs, taking away jobs from men, and men are identified by their jobs and their paycheck. You take that away, men are lost, flooding drugs. So now they're on drugs. You throw dads in jail. And you just see it done over and over and over again. So now we take what you're saying, what they did to the Middle East, bang, now they're doing the UK, and now they're going to do it over here. And it's the same people over and over and over again. And it kind of goes back to exactly along the lines of what G. Edgar Griffin says in this this movie he did called The Capitalist Conspiracy. The people at the very top, they're not, and this is what I say, and I get yelled at by everybody. The people at the very top are way beyond the Abrahamic religions. They're like these dark gods, dark pagan, fallen angel worshipers, and they're manipulating us at every moment. And then on top of that, you use the Babylonian money magic that is the Federal Reserve, where you just print money and bribe everybody. It's so insane, and it's just done over and over and over and over again. It's crazy.